Here at Nightmare Masterclass, I'm always looking for dark and mysterious source materials to investigate, and as my channel description indicates, I usually focus on horror, though every so often, I think it's pertinent to lighten things up. And as we've seen with Wham City Productions covered in my previous videos, comedy and horror are often strange and provocative bedfellows. Well, if you're fond of that combination, you might be a fan of The Eric Andre Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's The Eric Andre Show!
Hey, have you ever heard a guitar before?
Yeah.
They're like, woo, wee, woo, 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 wee, wee.
Why is this happening?
Psycho with my mind, lunatic hysteria. Woke up in the morning and I got diphtheria. Animal? Excuse me, ma'am? Can you help me, please, for a second? I'm sorry, miss. Hi, have you seen my dog? Describe him to me! Describe him to me!
With a public access veneer and an erratic jazz ensemble to boot, The Eric Andre Show has been abundant comedic fodder for college-aged stoners and like-minded lovers of the absurd for 4 seasons and counting. The show works to marry the banal and the darkly absurd, and I personally feel it's a match made in heaven. Or should I say hell? There is, after all, a reoccurring theme persisting across these 4 seasons, and it's a dark one. In this installment of Nightmare Masterclass, I attempt to answer a question. It's a simple question, really. Is Eric Andre in hell? Stay with me. As you may have gathered, Eric Andre is an actor and comedian. The son of a Haitian father and Jewish mother, Andre grew up in Boca Raton, Florida. He initially had musical ambitions. Andre graduated from the Berklee College of Music in Boston in 2005 with a BFA. He played the double bass, though his interest later shifted to comedic pursuits. Andre co-stars on another absurdist comedy, Man Seeking Woman, which I highly recommend. It's on FX. The Eric Andre Show premiered on Adult Swim in May of 2012, and it hit the comedy scene like a wrecking ball. And at this point, I'm obliged to say, if you haven't already seen the show, please check it out before watching the rest of this video. The show's format is that of your typical late-night talk show. There's an intro.
Ladies and gentlemen,
There's a monologue.
So they got a new actress out named Emma Roberts. Yeah. Apparently she's made out of Eric Roberts' jizz.
There's an interview segment.
What's your cell phone number?
What's my cell phone number?
We'll just put it up at the bottom. Anybody has some comments, questions about...
I don't want to do that.
About...
Please don't do that.
Okay.
There's a segment in which Andre perpetually makes an embarrassment of himself in public.
what year is this?
And there's usually a musical act.
Ladies and gentlemen, our musical guest of the evening, opera singer Lisa Stanley and her hype man, Killer Mike.
We sing it opera, ho. We sing it opera, ho.
Now, as you may have noticed, things aren't quite right here. Indeed, the Eric Andre Show is a confluence of cringe-inducing comedy and reality-bending horror. Notably, Andre intentionally makes his guests uncomfortable to get a reaction out of them. Andre is accompanied by sidekick Hannibal Buress, a great stand-up performer in his own right. Buress acts as something of a straight man on the Eric Andre Show, often tempering Andre's bizarre antics with his chill demeanor. Though when it comes to absurdity, occasionally Buress joins in.
Morpheus, Dorpheus, Orpheus, go eat some walruses, orifices, porridges. Morpheus, go get to the buffet and walruses.
I saw the Eric Andre Show live in Chicago last year, and Buress performed his Morpheus rap for at least a solid 10 minutes. And yet, it never seemed to get old. Eric Andre certainly isn't the first to subvert the tropes associated with the late-night talk show format. David Letterman might seem ancient at this point, but there was a time when he too worked to mock the late-night genre in any way deemed acceptable for television. He also gave some of his guests a pretty hard time. And to Conan O'Brien's credit, his endless parade of random and depraved characters such as the masturbating bear, the coked-up werewolf, and indeed the horny manatee are all noteworthy in this discussion. And if you look at this continuum of hosts back to The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, what you'll see is a line of comedians that work to progressively push the boundaries. Yes, Andre is not the first to play with the talk show format, but perhaps he is the most daring and ridiculous. Now, I would be distinctly lacking in my hostly duties without mentioning the inspiration Andre drew from Space Ghost Coast to Coast, the parody talk show that introduced an entire generation to surreal comedy, filled with inane non sequiturs and awkward, chaotic interviews. Of course, the Eric Andre Show is not for everyone. At times, it is excruciating to watch. But I personally feel that if you hang in there, you'll see that it's worth it. For instance, Andre's notorious Bird Up episode is one that drags out the singular most tired bits of the show. It's even billed as, quote, the worst show on television. The episode devolves into pure nonsense. But if you hang in there, the episode culminates into what is, in my opinion, one of the funniest punchlines of the entire show. But I don't want this to be a video where I explain why the Eric Andre Show is funny. Comedy is subjective, and you're entitled to your own comedic tastes. And moreover, the act of explaining a joke kind of sucks the fun right out of it. But I do think there's something worthy of discussion here. There's something going on underneath the surface of this dark, absurdist comedy, and I intend to get at the heart of it. So, is Eric Andre in hell? The central question of tonight's installment is something I read on a fan theory subreddit some time ago. The original theory is postulated as such. Eric is in hell, and Hannibal is the devil, or at least a demon. It's a fan theory that I think holds some water. And there are various iterations of this theory. One such theory holds that the show depicts host Eric Andre stuck in a kind of talk show purgatory. Of course, there are those detractors who will surely say that the Eric Andre show is pure, nonsensical absurdism, and as such, it is not intended to have a coherent narrative. I'm anticipating a number of comments in this vein, and that's totally fine. Those people may have a point. But a great fan theory is one that enriches the viewing experience, even perhaps despite its lack of canonical validity. And I believe this theory does just that. And what, pray tell, is more absurd than overanalyzing a 15-minute-long talk show spoof that airs on Adult Swim? Let's take the idea seriously and see where it goes. I will now attempt to put this into the context of a Christian hell. This is, after all, the version most commonly depicted in pop culture. As such, it's a logical starting point. I will rely on Dante's Inferno, a source that is perhaps best thought of as the definitive version of hell, if not in biblical canon, then certainly in the poetic zeitgeist of Christian mythology. At this point, I should note that I am not a theological scholar. As such, I'm merely speculating on the thematic connection between the Eric Andre Show and the version of hell depicted in Dante's Inferno. Indeed, Inferno is arguably the most ambitious attempt to depict hell in all its texture and tortuous detail. The first part of an epic poem aptly called the Divine Comedy, Inferno lays out the 9 concentric circles of hell. Dante journeys through these circles, guided faithfully by the Roman poet Virgil. Together they venture deeper and deeper into the festering pits of condemnation. The more severe the sin, the further removed from God the sinner becomes. As such, each circle is reserved for different, progressively more severe types of sinners. This version of hell serves as a form of divine retribution, i.e., punishment for defying the word of God. Perhaps more importantly, this version of hell is freely chosen by the sinner, who continues to justify their sins rather than asking for forgiveness. It certainly begs the question, what is comedian Eric Andre's sin? Alas, we cannot know for certain. The host's life is his own, and the show depicts not but a small glimpse into his neurosis. But if we consider the nature of the Eric Andre show as a form of punishment specifically designed for this peculiar man, perhaps we can deduce a few things. Note that Andre's monologue is consistently marked by utter failure. That is to say, it is the total epitome of a comedic monologue.
Michael Jackson, he hasn't been in the news too much lately, right? It's like, where are you hiding, Jacko?
He's dead, man.
Are you serious?
Stop it. Don't look, work the crowd, man. Don't look at me.
All right, whatever.
It's the kind of set comedians have nightmares about. Yet, night after night, Andre is made to continue this humiliating venture. Burris lounges behind him, heckling and prodding as the host struggles to find the humor in his situation. He continually fails to do so. Note also that Burris stands in opposition to Andre both in character and in function. He is the straight man, often suffering through Andre's tired antics. For the viewer, Burris is a viable entry point into the show itself. His perspective is one we can relate to. And through his eyes we can see a bumbling failure of a comedian. The very structure of the show serves to torture Andre in this way. Moreover, Andre is made to go out in public and continually make a fool out of himself time and time again. As evidenced by the various and at times baffling reactions to random streetgoers, comedy is all about context and perspective. It can be hilarious, horrifying, or just confusing. It seems relevant here to mention John Paul Sartre's observation that, quote, hell is other people. This is from his play No Exit. It's an idea I've explored on my channel previously in my Twilight Zone video. The idea is that we're all doomed to define ourselves in relation to other people. Specifically with respect to comedians, hell is defining yourself in relation to your audience and your comedic peers. I believe that Andre is somehow working to parse this out in literal terms before our very eyes. If I had to guess, based on all the, quote, sins laid out in Dante's Inferno, I would say that Andre is perhaps best categorized as a sower of discord. It only makes sense. After all, his comedic style is discordant, and comedy itself is inherently subversive. Well, good comedy is. There is a place reserved for the sowers of discord in the eighth circle of hell, among the fraudulent. The eighth circle is called Malborge, quote, evil ditches in English. Writer and literary critic Dorothy L. Sayers notes that Malborge is, quote, the image of the city in corruption, the progressive disintegration of every social relationship, personal and public, sexuality, ecclesiastical and civil office, language, ownership, counsel, authority, psychic influence, and material interdependence. All the media of the community's interchange are perverted and falsified. Now, that is metal. This description is strikingly reminiscent of the show in pretty much every facet. The Eric Andre show can be thought of as a twisted perversion of the late-night talk show. The comforting tropes of the format are made explicitly discomforting. But perhaps it's a little too pedantic to focus on the specifics of Inferno in relation to the Eric Andre show. But I do think the overarching darkness of the show's tone is significant. Let's focus for a moment on the specific kinds of demons that make hell their home. Writer Eugene Thacker discusses the archaic study known as demonology in his book, In the Dust of This Planet, which I highly recommend. Thacker notes that near the beginning of Inferno, a certain type of demon appears, and it is one which you are perhaps not as acquainted with as you are other types. Dante is led to a precipice where he encounters not any one entity, but rather an atmosphere marked by darkness, a kind of, quote, infernal storm. This is a place where the lustful have been sent, quote, those who make reason slave to appetite. The storm, the ominous atmosphere, it doesn't serve as the backdrop for any particular demon. The cloud itself is the demon. It is this type of demon that I believe haunts the Eric Andre show. It pervades every segment, every scene, every minute of the show. And it works specifically to pervert the format itself. But this is a modern-day show, and with Friedrich Nietzsche's infamous declaration that, quote, God is dead, the very notion of an all-knowing, all-powerful deity became irrelevant in the discourse of philosophical thought. Nonetheless, this demon persists. It stands not in defiance of God, but rather meaning itself. There is a malignant force that drives the show's underlying nihilism. This is abundantly obvious just from watching it. Do I think the show literally depicts Eric Andre's very own personal version of hell? Perhaps not exactly. I think it would be more prudent to say that this is a way of thinking about the show, a way that illuminates a deeper thematic essence. Yes, detractors of this theory may have a point that the show's pure absurdity cannot fit into a larger continuity. As such, any inane theory about the universe of the show is ultimately doomed. But guess what? Hell is not a coherent narrative. It does not fit neatly into the boxes of genre and plot conceits. It is darkness. It is the abyss. It is diametrically opposed to our ideals, and indeed everything we hold dear. It is perhaps most instructive to think of this version of hell depicted in the Eric Andre show as a modern-day version of Dante's Inferno. Decidedly, it does not take a cue from Aristotle, as Dante does, by dividing up hell into concentric circles. A postmodern hell is necessarily more paradoxical in nature. Before we move any further, I'm going to go over a few important terms that are used regularly in the vernacular of the show. Please bear with me here, because I'm illustrating an important point about the quality of the show. Craft punk, the comedic recombination of a Canadian cheese-based dish and a certain French electronic music duo. For understandable reasons, people seem to despise this character. Legalize ranch. A slogan in support of legalizing ranch dressing, a condiment that is already legal, but nonetheless central to the show. Investigate 311. An insistent campaign urging the public to probe 90s alt-rock band 311. This campaign ultimately culminated in the band's appearance on the finale of the show's 4th season. As you may have noticed by this point, there is a sense of what I would call playful futility that pervades the tonal quality of the Eric Andre show. It takes the piss out of everything. It revels in meaninglessness. Political catchphrases are trivialized with the inclusion of fatty, creamy condiments. Allusions to the 9/11 conspiracy are made irreverent with the totally arbitrary inclusion of a 90s alt-rock group. As such, it seems to be, at least in part, a criticism of American culture in all its vapid, junk food-eating glory. But it's more than that, too. This playful futility seems to me to indicate that the show is a modern-day iteration of an art movement that dates back to the early 20th century. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Andre follows in the tradition of Dadaism. Though to call it a tradition is something of a paradox. Dadaism is an art movement that stands in opposition of tradition itself, and that, I believe, is the key to understanding this whole Eric Andre's in hell theory. The Eric Andre show is the precise inverse of everything a late-night talk show should be. In the language of art knowledge, writer Donna Budd noted, Dada was born out of negative reaction to the horrors of World War I. This international movement was begun by a group of artists and poets associated with the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich. Dada rejected reason and logic, prizing nonsense, irrationality, and intuition. Does that remind you of anything? Notable artists in the realm of Dada include Marcel Duchamp, Tristan Tzara, Hugo Ball, Hannah Hoke, and Jean Arp. Dadists eschewed the capitalist leanings of their culture and decried violence in all its forms. As such, they largely identified with the radical left, and I do not think it's a stretch to say that Andre is sympathetic in this regard.
Do you think Margaret Thatcher had girl power?
Yes, of course.
Do you think she effectively utilized girl power by funneling money to illegal paramilitary death squads in Northern Ireland?
I don't know about that.
The Dadaists were responding to an artistic environment they felt had gone stale. By defying convention and acting without regard for artistic traditions that preceded them, the Dadaists redefined the meaning of art itself. Similarly, the Eric Andre show acts in defiance of an entertainment culture mired in convention and, well, safety. I contend that comedy should be anything but safe, especially during these politically tumultuous times. But now, with Jimmy Fallon playing flippy cups with the likes of Chris Hemsworth and Jennifer Lawrence, it seems we as a culture lost sight of that. Stunts such as these are window dressing for a complacent, fickle public. Yes, there is a time and place for escapism, and I want to note that I do not judge anyone who plops down before bed and watches Jimmy Fallon or Kimmel or any other one of these hosts for the sake of a few laughs. After all, that is their role, and we all need mindless entertainment from time to time. But all too often is escapism the de facto position for the audience. It's too easy. Every so often, pop culture needs a wrecking ball. After all, it is only by destroying the traditions of the past that we can learn to build anew. There is something arresting about the Eric Andre show. You never know what's going to happen. It subverts expectations. It not only stands in defiance of the talk show format, it stands in defiance of a public that accepts that format. And moreover, it stands in defiance of a system that continually perpetuates mind-numbing entertainment. It challenges you to face the nihilism, to look it in the eye and not blink. That is the essential quality of the show. It asks you not only to look into the abyss, but to look into it and laugh hysterically. Indeed, such a feat takes courage, and perhaps a bit of insanity. But these are crazy times, and courage is in especially short order. That's why it's important to applaud courage when you see it. And I, for one, applaud the Eric Andre show for this very reason. That wraps it up for this installment of Nightmare Masterclass. In the next episode, I'll make the case for antinatalism, relying solely upon remarks made by green frogs on Twitter. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.